to go back, I guess most people don't understand how somebody ever got to Sooke back in the day, but my dad was born in Prince Rupert. He was Metlakatla First Nations. His father moved the whole family down during the Second World War. And the reason they did that because the Americans were up there wanting to occupy the Aleutian Islands because of Japanese possibilities. And they're building the Alaska Highway. So there was quite a presence of American servicemen in Prince Rupert at the time. So my grandpa felt for his family safety, but more importantly, his wife. So he jumped in a fishing boat that he was operating for Todd's, and he went from cannery to cannery down the coast till he got to Steveston, which is where he set up shop with the family. And unfortunately, he died when he was 35 years old of a heart attack. And after that, my grandma remarried his half-brother, who happened to be working the fish traps in Sooke at the time. So the whole family moved over to Sooke when my dad was 12 years old. He subsequently worked in logging and for BC Hydro. Back in the day, they had work out there on the Flume and the Jordan River Dam. So he raised his family here, married my mom. She moved here from Ontario when she was 16 years old to live with her sister and work in a family business they had at that time. And then met my dad. We raised a family here where he coached soccer and we played softball and learned to swim in the potholes and grew up in a great little town.
So your roots run really deep here in Sooke. What does that actually mean to you now as Sooke is growing more and more?
Well, I mean, I've got quite an extended family, and lots of them do live out here, and lots have moved away as well. But I mean, realistically, I've tried living elsewhere. I lived in Victoria for almost 10 years, lived in Vancouver for 2 years, lived in Port Renfrew for a year and a half. Other than that, I've lived in Sooke, but every time I leave, and I always come back because I realize that it's a lot better place than I thought it was as a kid. I mean, as a kid, you think, oh, I'm going to find brighter pastures and a bigger world and more fun and more adventure. And I realized in the end, I mean, I was just lucky enough to grow up here. So
you had to go away to learn what you had here.
Yeah, you just wouldn't appreciate it unless you went somewhere else and realized that, wow, I mean, how great was it growing up in Sooke where you could, ride a bike 1,000,000 miles a day or every weekend, go down to the pothole swimming and hike and fish and you name it. We had the run of the world.
So when you were out running around the world, what kind of kid were you?
I was pretty active. I mean, I had an old-fashioned father. I mean, he was very disciplined, and I was one of the kids who got up at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning and took off to a buddy's place when I was young because, the less chance I had of running into an altercation with my father at the time. I had a brother and a sister, and we all grew up together, but, we weren't well off. So like most families in Sooke back then, you put food on the table and a roof over your head, and that's about all the money you had left over. So grew up quite frugal and I wouldn't say poor, but you didn't have a lot of the extras that people expect nowadays, that's for sure. So
how do you think that has influenced the way you've lived your life and how your life has been as an adult?
Well, I can appreciate people who are struggling, who come from a way of life that doesn't necessarily give them everything they need. And definitely I get the idea of how tough it is to raise a family because my parents had a tough time, but they sacrificed and they did what they had to do. And I see people struggling now for the same thing. So I'm a compassionate person. I'm hard nails because I was raised that way. There was not a lot of hugging and kissing in my family growing up. So it was all business and you learn to, use your emotional stuff and keep it tied in. But most importantly, I mean, I had a lot of friends and lots of extended family growing up. So, a lot of closeness through that, those are my channels.
Other people who can fill in the gaps in a way too.
Yeah, absolutely.
For a lot of kids of that generation, our generation, and, those circumstances at home, we went out to work early. How old were you when you got your first job, whether it was a formal job or not?
Well, oddly enough, I mean, it wasn't a job, but when we were young, we used to pick blackberries every summer and we'd go around the neighborhood selling blackberries. But we enjoyed that, and it was the way to get extra little bits of money towards whatever it is you want to do. My first job was a paper boy, and I think I was 11 years old then, and I had a paper route up and down Grant Road and Maple Avenue back in the day. And then after that, I'd worked for my uncle. He was a carpenter and a contractor back in the day. He'd do 1 or 2 houses a year, very similar to what I do now. And he would get us to pull the nails out of the boards and to dig the holes, that they didn't get quite dug big enough at the time, and do the ditching and sand and you name it. So, yeah, we were always active. And my dad owned a small business with evergreens. So he picked shallal, huckleberry, and believe it or not, broom. I mean, they sold that from the market here back to Toronto, where they use it in flower arrangements everywhere. Our West Coast broom, believe it or not. So we got paid quite handsomely for that. It was like $2 for a bunch, a big handful. And he would ship it and do all the tying and boxing and everything else. And we'd go to the airport with him and load it on the transport planes. And
were you a happy person when you were at work? Was that something that you really took to as a young person?
Yeah, I enjoyed working. I mean, I was a big kid for my age. I was 6'1" in grade 7, and I grew to 6'2.5" by grade 8, but I never grew any taller after that. I just started to fill out as a kid, but I was a big, strong kid. And I liked physical fitness. I liked physical activity. I played soccer, football, baseball, volleyball, basketball, anything I could do. I had a lot of energy, and I needed some outlets, so sports were the big thing for me, or working.
When you went off to explore the world, you mentioned you lived in a couple of other places, or a few other places. Did you travel much?
I didn't travel a lot when I was younger. I mean, I got the opportunity to move to Vancouver. I guess I was 21 years old. It was 1986, oddly enough, for Expo. So when I went back there, and I worked at a mill in New Westminster, and I got to work at that mill because I had worked cleanup at the mill in Sooke during high school. And every weekend you'd go down there and spend the Sunday, and we'd work hard, and they'd pay us really good money. But so when the mill came back online after another one of our recessions in the 80s, they offered me a job in New Westminster, and I took that and spent 2.5 years there. And then another year came back when the opportunity came back and spent another year at the mill here. So.
I found it interesting, your Indigenous roots. How much do you think about those, or how much do they play a part in your life today?
Well, it's funny you ask that, because growing up in Sooke, it was different. There wasn't a us and a them thing. I mean, I had lots of friends who I still have to this very day who were Indigenous. Most people didn't live on the reserve back in the early Sooke days. They were property owners all over town. So it wasn't until the mid or late 80s that the government changed and really started endorsing, more options and property possibilities for First Nations people. But growing up as a kid, my dad's family would come down every so often, and they'd bring frozen ooligans, because they were big in the Skeena River up in Prince Rupert. And I just remember some of the aunts and the cousins and stuff, they pinch your cheeks and say, Ev, you sure have some good-looking kids here, And back then, the whole thing was First Nations wanted to be included. They didn't want it to be divisive. And they were happy for Ev because he was, into a community, and there was no prejudice for him, and he got to be one of the bunch and things like that. I remember he was always quite proud of that. So he would always, explain the situation to his family, and they were always very envious and wish things were more like that, even up in Rupert and Terrace and places like that. So yeah, I grew up kind of not really exposed to a big Indigenous culture, because everybody in Sooke, everybody liked everybody, or if they didn't like each other, it had nothing to do with their race, creed, color, or religion. It was just, typical kid stuff,
We have, over the last 10 years, 15 years, learned more about government policy with Indigenous people and no doubt the wrongs that were done. Has that been a process for you to come to what your belief system is, learning those kinds of things?
Yeah, it's bittersweet, but I mean, I embrace both sides. I mean, I understand a lot of things that went on with Indigenous people back in the day, and I understand growing up in a very white culture exactly what it's all like. But I don't use it as an excuse or a leverage or anything. My dad or my grandpa was in a residential school in Alert Bay, and he spent 6 years there, and he just left on his own. Once he got to be 17 years old, he just up and left and went back to his reserve up in Rupert. I mean, so back in the day, he was taking quite a ways away from where he'd grown up and stuff. And he had family that went to other residential schools, other places as well. And yeah, I mean, it's tough, but my grandpa didn't dwell on it. I mean, I only know the stories from my dad, but, he didn't talk about it a lot. He just moved forward. He got a very good job fishing with a company that was run by, white business owners. So they gave him an opportunity, and he was really good at what he did. So he was happy. And then they let him, of course, move from Rupert all the way down to Steveston. So we didn't carry any animosities or whatnot. My dad was always considered what you'd call a half-breed when he was growing up in Sooke. And he hung out with a bunch of other First Nations guys who all had Indigenous roots and stuff. But, they all got along. And again, everybody worked together. And, they were coaching. They were volunteer firemen. They were part of the Sooke Athletic Association, the Community Association. Everybody was mixed in. So
you were definitely employed in the resource sector in the 80s, and that was a very different resource sector than what it is today. How do you think your experiences in that have shaped kind of your approach to the environment and land and resources today?
Well, I mean, if you look around, especially Canada in general, but look around Sooke, the hillsides are covered with trees. There's lots of lakes, there's lots of rivers, there's lots of streams. I mean, we're lucky again. I mean, the logging community has come a long way since back in the early days. And at the same time, depending on which company ran the logging show, depended on how they would expose more or less, some of the clear cuttings and different things that went on back in the day. But I do think we need logging now. We need logging more than ever because all these wildfires is because we don't have any fire breaks anywhere. And if you go up there and you log in between different patches of timber, it gives the fire somewhere to stop, and it doesn't build up steam and build up fuel, from all those standing trees. So back in the day, yeah, we still had some fires, but nothing like now, because everything up there now is bush, trees, and or deadwood, as in the interior with all the pine beetle. But realistically, I think there's a happy relationship there between both. And logging is farming, so the stuff grows back. So every area, as long as you don't clear cut thousands and thousands of square miles and you do pieces at a time, I think both can be thriving with each other.
It's we're not talking policy necessarily today, but it's almost impossible in Sooke these days to have a conversation with anybody without talking about their sense of what development should be for Sooke. And I guess rather than just even look at policy, you're a long-time Sookie. What's your feeling as you've seen it grown in the way that you've seen it grow?
Well, when I was younger, it was the only kind of work that was around. You either worked in the bush, you were a fisherman, granted there was some mining in Jordan River at the time, or you built houses. And I worked with my uncle, and I'd build 1 or 2 houses a year, and I'd work with them. And of course, subdivisions popped up, and years would go by. I mean, there was times in the 80s and the 90s there was no building going on because, the economy was down and nobody could afford it. So I had to go do other things. I did renovations. I exchanged windows out of people's houses from aluminum to vinyl. I would redo roofs. I would redo sidings. We'd do painting. Whatever you could to make a living. And that's the other thing about building. I mean, these are young guys who don't necessarily have the aptitude for a university education or some scholastic training, So these guys have big hearts. They want to raise families too. So they use their skills, their hard working qualities and their strong backs. And that was always available back in the day. And my generation was lucky. We're probably the tail end of that. The ones nowadays, I mean, they want you to have a $20,000 ticket to be able to fall trees, $20,000 to be able to get, a license to drive a big rig. And where are these kids supposed to come up with all this money to get the training and stuff they need? There should be some options for it. because the governments are always looking for more people to do driving, laboring, carpenters, drywallers, roofers, all these things. There has to be some way to help these people, get into the market with this ticketing process that everybody has to be qualified now. Back then you just had to work under a 25, 30 or 40-year-old guy, learn the trade, and there you go.
And here you are years later doing it just that way.
Yeah, and I get this stigma attached to it with people, oh, you're a big developer or whatever. I've never developed anything in my life. I've helped people with rezones and some subdivisions because they're trying to get ahead and, do a lot for their kid or for themselves on their own properties and stuff. But I built one, maybe two houses a year for 25 years. And some years I didn't build any houses, things were tight.
What do you think of the pace at which Sooke has developed over the last 10 years?
Well, it's grown a lot, but I think if you really come to terms with it, a lot of the people that I've built and sold to over the years or custom built for, they're from Manitoba, Ontario, Saskatchewan, they're from Newfoundland, New Brunswick, they're from all over the country. We just happen to live in the Hawaii of Canada, the best place in the country to possibly live. And we've got clean air, we've got clean water, we've got mountains, streams, again, this quality of life that you can't get anywhere else in the country. And it's probably 8 to 10 months a year that you can have this great quality of life. So guess what? Everybody wants to move here. I went to a conference, oddly enough, back in 2010, and there was a Collier's property manager, realtor guy. He was the keynote speaker at the time, and he got up in front of all these counselors and all these places. It was that the federal one, the FCM, that we get to go to. And he said, all you people around here, I just want you to understand what's going on in the country and so on. And this was 2010. And he said, where's everybody from? People put up their hands and they'd say things. And he said, anybody here from British Columbia? And so a bunch of people put up their hands and stuff. He says, how about Vancouver Island? And a bunch of us put our hands up. And he said, just to give everybody in this room an idea what's going on in our country, he says, the market shift is happening. And he said, there's going to be all you retirees here. He says 6% are going to Toronto. 6% will go to Vancouver. He said there will be another 6 or 7% that will go to the Okanagan. 13% will go to southern Vancouver Island, and not 1% anywhere else in the country. And these are for transient retirees. So this was 2010. And in 2010, I think our population in Sooke was around 7,500. Here we are at 18,000 almost now. So the guy, whatever he was talking about back in 2010, resonated, and people did do exactly what he said. The guy gave you a crystal ball on what was happening in the market in Canada. And where's all the housing most expensive? Okanagan, Vancouver, Toronto, Victoria, southern Vancouver Island. Because that's where everybody wants to be. And probably Toronto more for the business component and, the upward professionals and things like that. But realistically, the quality of life is on the island here.
So when you see that more than doubling of the population in such a short time, as a long-time Sookie, how do you see life has changed as a result of it?
Well, we don't have near the flexibility and the availability to certain things that we used to have as a kid. I could ride a bike on a Sunday in Sooke because nothing was open on a Sunday, and you could go through we didn't even have a stoplight. We had a stop sign there at the Otter Point, and that was it. But more importantly, there was these freedoms around town and around neighborhoods. Everybody knew everybody. It was a great small town. Your ball coach was also your high school teacher. The policemen were involved in every time they moved here and traded places with wherever they came from. They get involved with the Lions Club or the Rotary Club and Sooke Athletic Association. We weren't incorporated back then, so everybody pitched in. We had All Sooke Day that every sports team in Sooke, your job was parking cars down there or selling candy bars and freezies. You had a job to do, and the whole town did it together.
Do you see that as something that's been lost or can be regained?
Well, our town's gotten so much busier now, and there's a lot of people. Back in those days, the people that lived in Sooke worked in Sooke. So you weren't working in Victoria every morning. And was there some? Probably some. All the doctors we had back then all lived in Sooke, and there was probably almost as many doctors when I was a kid as there is now. And the sad reality is the medical system now has changed in the sense where they just don't even have the people to service. I mean, when I was a kid, even if you didn't like the doctor you were with, you just walk down the road and go to the next guy. Doors were wide open. Everybody picked and chose whoever they wanted. So to get around Sooke back then and to have all those things available to you, they were fantastic. Do I love what's going on in Sooke now? Not so much. I mean, it's growing fast. We haven't kept up with it. I think we could have done a lot better job in how we handled it. Traffic in and out is out of this world, and it's gone crazy. We didn't build interior roads, and we didn't do the things we should have done that should have tied in. When people were subdividing and doing rezones back when I was on council in 2014, they all had to do traffic studies and tell you how they were going to move the traffic and all this. And I look back now and I think, what a waste of time and money, because nobody followed any of it anyway. You know, they were required to do these $10,000 and $15,000 traffic studies, and it was just a part of the application. It didn't matter what it said. If it said, nope, Sooke's too big for the one road we have coming in, don't build anymore, that's what it probably should have said, but it didn't.
So there are a lot of people who voice similar concerns and talk about these kinds of things. What is it in you, do you think, that makes you say, well, I'm going to run for council and try and do something?
Well, because the one thing I did learn, especially on the first term on council, it's a 4 to 5 year learning curve. You've got local government act rules, you've got local bylaws, you've got policies, you've got all these different things that function with a council that you have to get down into the paperwork, and you got to try and understand how to make things happen. And you're going to find real quick that staff has a completely different job than you do as a councillor. And staff wants to go in a direction that they've read in a magazine or from their professional orientation group or from the university they came from that says this is how a town should be built or should grow. So you're always conflicting with them. They're always trying to tell you we're your expert. And staff aren't your experts. They're your facilitators. There's a difference. I mean, there's no rule book for planners. Planners come in, and it's no different than getting a guy to do an arborist job on your tree. You can get an arborist to tell you that's the healthiest tree in the world, and you get another one that tells you that one should come down tomorrow. So planners do the same thing. You get a planner that's very green and wants to save the world, and you got other planners who actually want to build cities and towns. So you don't know what you're getting until they show up and they start changing all the rules to suit what they think the world should be like. And if it'd be different, engineers, they've got a rule book. The engineers have to follow MMCD drawings and plans, and the roads are built a certain spec in a certain way. Planning, no. And Sooke turned over so many planners in such a short period of time that we got no rhyme to any of our reason here.
It can be said that with the events happening in the United States these days, things are economically more up in the air between tariff policy on and off and realignment of markets and so on. If the economy takes a bit of a hit for it, worldwide even, that could happen. What do you think is the response for Sooke? Because it's, as you said, a community that's been built on a sort of hyper economy over the last 20 years. That's only, with the exception of one small dip, has only grown. That could change. So, what do you see as the opportunity for Sooke in that?
Well, I mean, at this point, you look at Canada as a whole, and Carney's been talking about it with his governance model. We have to start finding different people to trade with, different ways to make Canada work. We can't keep relying on the United States to prop us up and for us to sell all our goods to. In Sooke, do we keep relying on the housing industry as being the only one? Absolutely not. But if you look at that OCP that's sitting in mothballs right now that they want to reenact, there is no new industrial property anywhere. So if you want to build your town and have jobs here for people from my walk, then you have to build industrial jobs. You have to build jobs that have small manufacturing plants that do something. These are trades jobs, and they have to go somewhere. Even guys who own gravel trucks and guys who own bricklaying outfits, and you need a place to put these people. And there's nothing in that new OCP that offers this. The other thing the new OCP does is it offers this huge 8, 10, 12% growth every year for a number of years. So everybody thinks that this new OCP is going to be the savior. It's not. They should be talking about doing commercial and industrial space in this new OCP, which they don't. But they're talking about way more residential and way more apartment buildings, and where are we going to put everybody? And they want it all along Sooke Road, right to Cooper's Cove. So they're not looking for just the downtown either. They're looking at making our town grow along the whole highway system, right till the Machosen border.
Well, you said we weren't going to do it, but here we are going into policies. I'm going to swing back a little bit and ask you more personally, just what do you do for fun? What puts you in a good state of mind when you're not working or thinking of these things?
Well, I'm still active in the Sooke Slow Pitch League. I play with a bunch of 25 and 35-year-olds, and it's great because it brings me back down to earth, and it gives you a better understanding of what struggles younger people have, and I enjoy it. I've played softball my whole life, so I get to, at 61 years old, keep playing with a bunch of kids, and they keep me young, and I love it. I played golf on most weekends, and I hadn't played that much since I was a teenager, but then took it up again a few years ago, and it's a great way. You drive around in a golf cart and, hang out with couple of buddies, and talk about old times. Some of the best friends I have are guys I went to elementary school with, so I've still got a pretty good thing going in Sooke, and I know a lot of people. So I still have a great lifestyle. Do I wish it was smaller and more, perfect like it used to be? Yeah, but that's never going to happen again, not for here. Unless they build some massive road around Sooke like they did up in, Up Island and Nanaimo and, and Qualicum and Parksville and stuff, but I don't see that happening here.
Where do you go when you feel the need for a little bit of peace or reflection? What place or what do you do that brings that to you?
Well, I live on Otter Point Road out near Poyer Lake, so I've got almost 2 acres of property where I'm at, but I do a bit of gardening and stuff, but I have a dog, and she's sitting here with us, but we just go hike up on the top of Broom Hill. I'm on the backside of Broom Hill, and I can walk to the top of that mountain there and stare out of the most gorgeous view on the planet, and you get a peace of mind, and nobody to bother you. There's hardly anybody on the trails. It's great, and there's lots of wildlife, birds, raccoons, squirrels, you name it. So yeah, that's a peace of mind for me.
Okay, last question and a complete switch. What kind of music do you listen to?
I like old 80s rock and roll, and 70s too, I guess. Beatles were my favorite band in the whole world. Love them, but, I grew up with AC/DC and Fleetwood Mac and Rolling Stones. So, yeah, I still like old music. I mean, I have a niece that lives with us. She has for the last 3 years, and I'm learning some of the newer stuff, but realistically, I tolerate it more than I like it. So,
is there anything from the newer stuff you think, well, that's not too bad?
Well, the stuff that I find, I love Nickelback now, and apparently they're not new. I bet they were a 90s band, but I listen to some of their stuff, and I think it's fantastic. And there's another group called Jet that I really like some of their music. So my niece changes all my Spotify to have some of her music and mine, and then she mixes some stuff in the middle. So I'm getting more diverse as I get older here. But
And do you have a favorite song?
Louis Armstrong, It's a Wonderful World.
And it is. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.